Thank you for y'all coming tonight to this gathering. My name is Lindsey Springer. For address purposes, you can contact me at 5147 South Harvard, number 116, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 74135. You can call me at 918-748-5539. And you can email me at lindsey@mindspring.com. At the point that you're watching this tape, you have already figured out about penaltyprotester.com and .org, because those are my websites. For 14 years, I have been doing what I believe is what God asked me to do, which is to get rid of the Internal Revenue Service from our government, from our system, from the way we operate. I had a very naive approach to that. I thought that take the issue to a federal judge and a couple of years later it would be taken care of and I could go on with the rest of my life. At first, of course, the response was not only no, but hell no. I wasn't going to do it. And I realized that God had a way of inspiring people to do things that they don't want to do. Not because I today don't think I would have wanted to do it, but I had no information or knowledge to base a decision on why I'd want to do it. In my opinion, it's the same way as accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. The way that the world came to know Jesus was by, do you have trouble? If you do, Jesus can help you. And if you used to have an ailment and you used to go to the doctor, now Jesus can take it from you. And my introduction was I raised my right hand and accepted Jesus, and they sent me to the counselors, and they said, now Lindsey, you used to do all these things the man's way, and now you're going to do them God's way. And he gave me some examples about you used to go to the doctor, now Jesus. You used to need counseling, now Jesus. And I said, well, what about the Internal Revenue Service? And he said, well, you'll have to hire an accountant and a lawyer for that one. And I realized right then and there that I had found something that even religion did not cover. And what has happened in 14 years, I started out naive, and then I became with knowledge. And the ministry's mission's name is Bondage Breakers Ministry. There are a lot of bondage breakers walking on this planet right now. Whether they know they're indirectly or directly related to something that God used me to do is a different question. I went through civil. I saw that the judges were making up things as they went along. I then decided that the origin of the civil and threat and the penalty threat was criminal. Most people do certain acts for the federal government based upon the threat. If they don't do it, they're going to go to jail. And I learned technical terms like lots of crimes are an act of commission. Very few crimes are acts of omission. An omission crime is a failure to do something that the law requires you, forces you without right to do. The prohibited, self-explanatory, like robbing a bank. It says illegal to rob a bank. You are prohibited from taking that act. And when I went into these crimes of omission, I saw that under federal law, there was absent an interstate nexus, an interstate element that would make a failure to do anything reachable by Congress's power under the Commerce Clause. Congress regulates crime under the Commerce Clause. The only specific provision in the Constitution that allows them a separate power to regulate is the power to punish for the counterfeiting of securities and current coin of the United States. That's it. The word punish doesn't appear anywhere else. Under the Commerce Clause, then it comes in as a needful tool to regulate interstate transactions. Among the several states, the Supreme Court describes what the interstate meaning is. The Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 says, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, among the several states, and with the Indian tribes. Think about those three things. They are all regulating intercourse across state line between two states, two people in two different states. And a crime of action or omission that Congress is promulgating in a statute must have an interstate nexus. It's easy to figure out, like in a bank robbery case, how they did it. They got the interstate nexus was if the bank was FDIC insured. Even though you didn't go across state line with the money you stole from the bank, because the bank had the insurance from the federal government, that was an interstate nexus. The juries are always directed, you must find the bank was FDIC insured. When you get to a crime of omission, all of a sudden that interstate nexus dies. What is the thing that you took across state line when you omitted something? Becomes a very important question to ask. And in that answer you find, if you did nothing, how could you have gone across state line with nothing? Another excellent way at arriving at where I'm taking it tonight is dealing with the conspiracy to defraud under federal law. It's Title 18, Section 371. And the law says that it is illegal to enter into a conspiracy to violate a federal law, commit an offense, or to defraud the United States. And in that second term, defraud, which is a common law term, the conspiracy to defraud has taken on a meaning when it comes to this one area, that if you are endeavoring to impede, impair, obstruct, or defeat the lawful functions of the IRS in the computation, ascertainment, assessment, and collection of income taxes, that this is a crime under the defraud prong of the conspiracy statute. And there's a problem with that. And it was a simple problem, and there's a lot of people that have gone to jail over conspiracy, not just on taxes. Can you imagine a conspiracy to do nothing? A conspiracy to commit an omission. All right? Are you with me? And so all of a sudden we have this conspiracy to do something not prohibited by law, to do something that is legal. It is not prohibited for a man to impede, impair, obstruct, and defeat the IRS's function in the computation, ascertainment, assessment, and collection of income taxes. But right now, under our current system, it is a conspiracy, it is a crime, and it is illegal if two or more people think about doing what that one man can do without threat of punishment. So two people can conspire to impede, impair, obstruct, and defeat the IRS's function, and that's a crime under Section 371. But if one of them actually succeeds in doing it, it's a legal act. And see, that doesn't make any sense to anybody that thinks rationally. How can two people think about doing something, and that something then becomes, that even though they didn't do it, they just thought about doing it, and that's a crime, but one of them go do it all day long. Both of them can take different angles and go do the same thing on both sides of the street, and both of them have not committed a crime. Now all of a sudden, I get your attention, because we can't have it both ways. You can't say Congress doesn't have to write anymore a law that is making an act illegal. And what even got worse in this one area, which told me so much about that we're right on it and that we have to get rid of it, was that in the federal system we have a sentencing guideline that the judges have had a couple of years of hell, and I know I gave them a little bit of it, because they are all inconsistent in what they're doing. They love having arbitrary and capricious power. They don't like having to act within two boundaries. They don't like it. And so they do things to construe things to go outside those boundaries and like, well, what are you going to do about it? And in particular, in the sentencing guidelines, the United States sentencing guidelines, I found there's a specific guideline if you are found guilty of impeding, impairing, obstructing, and defeating the IRS in their function of all those 4 words I used. They have a guideline that tells a judge, here's how much you can sentence a person if a jury finds him guilty of impeding, impairing, obstructing, and defeating. But the only problem with there's no law that makes impeding, impairing, obstructing, and defeating illegal. They skipped right over that. They skipped right over it because there was no interstate nexus that they could establish to write a law that made that illegal. See, if the interstate nexus doesn't exist in the federal law, then Congress isn't regulating commerce among the several states. And therefore, the act that they have written violates the powers of the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment say that all powers not given to the United States, I'm making it in simple terms, is reserved to the states who gave them their limited power, or to the people who gave the states the power. It's a real simple concept. So Congress has to act within its limited area. And what I want to present to you tonight in a way that you can understand, the way that the world needs to understand why we can't have the IRS anymore in the United States of America. We can't have it. We can't endorse it. But this has nothing to do with taxes. And get that very clear. This has to do with penalties, civil penalties, for people who don't do a thing they are told by somebody, but not the law, that they are required to do. Penalties criminally on the federal level on those people who are threatened with a crime if they don't act. Can you imagine living in a place, living in a country, where if you just exist, by that mere existing, if you fail to do something in that existing, you've committed a crime against your government? You're looking at a guy who for 14 years has relied upon the giving from other people to survive. I've never had something to sell. And if you look at what they've done to me, first they made up numbers using statistical information in 1996. They couldn't find anything that I had made as income. They weren't confined to the word income, so they went up and made Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then imposed a tax for 6 years on me based upon those Bureau of Labor and Statistics. I challenged that as unconstitutional. I challenged it as a violation of the 13th Amendment, no slavery. You can't just make stuff up. I went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States on June 18th, 1998. The Supreme Court decided they were not going to consider my question. On July 22nd, Congress wrote Section 7491 that made any court proceeding where the items of income were constructed using statistical information, the burden shifts to the Secretary of the Treasury to prove those numbers in any court proceeding. So even though I lost my Supreme Court case, America won with the challenge. They heard it. They didn't want to address it in a written opinion like Roe v. Wade, but they got the message. And I understand, I've done that. I could give you numerous examples over the last 14 years where they have refused to acknowledge what I'm telling you, and then they've done it their own way. Overhauling the IRS was just a small part of that. And if you don't think that this matters to state and state tax return penalties and so forth, and the revenue for a state, per se, it does, because if you can't be penalized at the federal level, that cuts out the power of the state to penalize in the same arena, because the state, it lays its security on what you do with the federal government. I came to this conclusion that if the 16th Amendment was a surrender of power by the states through the 10th Amendment to the United States, then the states themselves are with whatever power that they have left after that power is given to the United States. And the Supreme Court and other courts have ruled that the 16th Amendment has no limitation. So the states gave all the power to tax income to the United States. Well, where did the states get the power to tax that income in? Is it a second round of income? They don't want to accept that they gave all that power away. But I'll guarantee you that they gave all the power they had away. If you read the 10th Amendment, the states could only give to the United States what the people of that state gave to that state. There's nothing more that they could give them. And of course, I knew when I was ready to go live again, when I was having to write briefs to a federal court telling him that the reason why the government was wrong was because have is a present tense verb. I knew at that point that I was here, and I'll give you another thing that's kind of unique to me, and I watch it very carefully because I believe God brought me here for a reason, and I'm more afraid of not accomplishing what He set me out to accomplish than I am on all the things that stand in my way to accomplish that. But today is March 4th, 2006. And I'll just give you something to think about as we go through here. March 4th, 200 in 06. 200 in 06. March 4th to 00, that's March 4th, 2006. You got to think about it a minute. But that's why we're here. We're going forward to break the nexus. I gave the IRS 7 years after the Revenue Restructuring Act was passed, and they are now trying to construe it as meaningless. They're trying to say any court proceeding in that statute means no court proceeding. They think the phrase, no penalty shall apply, means they can apply any penalty they want. And have is not a present tense verb. Can you imagine? So I stand here presenting what I'm presenting, not without great concern. And what you have in your hands is going to be very apparent to you. And I believe the reason why God gave the name of my mission, Bondage Breakers Ministries, is so that the mission could be defined as breaking the bondage. And for those people who ask what that bondage is, I just let you answer that to yourself. What bondage are you in? Now, this complaint that I filed 2 weeks ago is in response to things that I have gone through. And I withhold sometimes doing things out of the word patience. It is difficult at times to restrain me because I so want you to see all the things that I've been through. And one of the things that I'm going to share with you before I go into this complaint is on the front page of this document right here is a copy of a check written to me on January 3rd, 2006 from the United States Treasury Department for $17,000. And there was only one problem with that check. That when they stole the money from me, it was $19,000. It was counted 3 times in front of my wife, 3 federal agents who were searching my house trying to find evidence of a crime. They spent a lot of time at my house trying to find something, but they didn't want to tell me what it was. They didn't give me an affidavit to tell me why they had probable cause. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to shut me up. But something that happened while they were at my house, they had a criminal amongst them that was authorized to be in my house by way of a federal warrant to search my house. And between the time that money, that $19,000 that I just received in a gift, I just received it, was put into a envelope and zipped up, when it went to the bank, it became $17,000. And at first they wouldn't give it back to me. They told the judge in pleadings that it was evidence of cash dealing. which I, of course, told the judge, they know the check that I got for it. They know where I cashed it. It wasn't cash dealing, and they knew that. He writes in an order, Mr. Springer needs to do X. But when he does it, and when I'm sure he's going to do it, the government needs to be prepared to tell him why that money should not be given back to me unless it's contraband, which they knew wasn't contraband. It was a gift given to me. As I said earlier, I survive only on those things. I've had many a temptation, many offer, and I've rejected every one of them. But when they went to put the money in the bank teller on video camera only counts out $17,000. All of a sudden, there's a $2,000 deficiency between the receipt I got and the receipt the teller gave. They spent 5 months trying to get the Treasury Department to approve giving me $19,000 back. But they couldn't justify it because they only had a deposit receipt for $17,000. They kept trying to keep me from getting the money because they didn't want to tell me that they stole money while they were at my house. Now, I received this as a gift. I know it's hard to see taking something from me as a gift, but it is. Because it is in part going to be, I'm suing all the agents at my house under Bivens for violating my rights. I couldn't even go to the police department and file a police report because then everybody in town would have known at some point in time I had that much money in my house, which wouldn't have been there very long. Bills, it goes right out. But I can't go and tell on them and get a police report because that'll become public information. I became strapped for what I could do. And so in a series of 3 events, and this being the last one, I'll take you into the first one, okay? There is, in your hands, on the red tab, on the very top right corner of a 2005 1040 U.S. individual income tax return, there is a letter OMB and then a number. It says number up at the top right corner. Everybody see that? OMB and number on the red tab front page. And that number, 1545-0074, is going to become a very important number to you because it's on there for a reason. Now, OMB stands for Office of Management and Budget. And this law, Office of Management and Budget, is created by the Paperwork Reduction Act. And if you'll draw your attention to the bottom of this page in a little footnote, you will see it says, for disclosure, Privacy Act and Paperwork Reduction Act, see page 78. Of what? Have you ever seen a 78-page 1040 form? Now, the reason why this little omission is there, and no one will catch it, is because all of those things that the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Privacy Act, and the Disclosure Act require to be appearing on the form and not in any other place. So now we see page 78. Well, I did some homework, and I went and got the 1040 instruction booklet for 2005, and that will be in, I'm sorry, it's going to be right after, it's going to be the green tab, the third tab. I did this, I have to tell this in the complaint, a story. I'm going to take you through it a little differently. This is the front page of the instruction booklet, and the next page is page 78 for 2005. And just so you know these two match up, the very top of this page says Disclosure, Privacy Act, and Paperwork Reduction Act Notice. That lines right up with the bottom footnote on the 2005 1040 form. In no way am I telling you that you do not have to submit this document to the IRS. In no way am I telling you you don't have to pay any federal taxes. I am presenting you this information based upon penalty, because penalty is what has us in bondage. It's not the tax, it's the penalty. Now, on this document right here, on the very left column, at the very bottom, we're going to read this all out loud, and you guys can read it silently, and I want you to see it. It says, you are not required to provide the information requested on a form that is subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act unless the form displays a valid control number. Now, why that's so important is because if you fail to supply information on a form with a valid control number, you can be penalized for failing to supply that information timely. I did not say anything about taxes. I said fail to give the information. You could be penalized. There are several penalties that I am talking about. Criminal, failure to supply the information. Civil, failure to supply the information. Interest on the failure to supply the information at the time that they wanted it. Here is a claim in an instruction booklet that tells you you don't have to answer any of the questions on the form if it doesn't have a valid OMB number. Okay? And the reason why I'm giving this to you is because I believe in getting rid of the Internal Revenue Service, we have to prove that the IRS cannot comply with the law. We already know, no one in America knows, especially, I believe, very few people know what I'm telling you right now. And this is embedded in the theory that since you've ever filed a 1040 form before, you can be penalized for not filing one in the future because you filed one in the past. That's the embedded theory. Okay? Now, go back to the purple tab, which is the second tab. And now I'm giving you a copy of from 1990 to 2004's 1040 forms. I want to kind of show you a little picture. Have you ever seen a bunch of drawings and then somebody takes them together and they flip it and it looks like a picture show? Well, I'm going to do that for you right here in a way. Now, on this particular form, on the very first purple tabbed document, it says 1990 1040 U.S. Individual Income Tax Form. And there's an OMB number up there, and it says 15450074. That's the same number on the 2005 form. Now, that's going to become very important in about an hour. Okay? Very important in about an hour. But just remember, and I'll give you a little teaser, that number, if it's valid, can only be good for 1 or 3 years. And you're going to see that on the application form here in just a minute because it's attached in the back. The application to get the approval for this number. And what the government does in the application is admit to the Office of Management and Budget that they can't comply with the laws. They admit it. But because no one looked close enough, they were all being subject to penalties. And as long as they were being subject to penalties, i.e. getting away with things that they shouldn't get away with, they're going to keep doing it. A congressman will accept bribes until he's caught on camera, and then he'll plead guilty. That's what will happen. So now you flip to the next, stop, I'm sorry. On this 1990 form, now I want you to look at the bottom of the page. Do you see any footnote at the bottom of the page? Oh, they want you to really realize this one. Go back up there to the OMB number and then drop down about 1 inch. Look what they wrote. They put this up here. For Privacy Act, Paperwork Reduction Act, see instructions. Oh, there's instructions. They didn't use that in 05. They just said see page 78. Now, from 1990 to 2005, that Privacy Act notice dropped from the up there below your Social Security number right next to your wife, pretty important. Down at the bottom, a footnote means we don't want you to see it. All right? And I use this many times, and I'll use it again. But the tax law is like a speed limit sign. But instead of having a speed limit that you can't exceed or you're going to pay a tax, a ticket, a fine, they put a question mark on the sign and in a little fine detail at the bottom it says, see Highway Patrolman for more details. That is exactly how they've written the tax laws. Now go to the next page, or the 2 pages, every 2 pages. I try to give you a copy of the full form. Now, the second page is very important on every one of these documents, but you're not going to learn about the second page just yet. And the reason why we're going to make such a big deal about that second page is because there are changes every year on that second page that have to be approved by the Office of Management and Budget. Well, in order to be approved by the Office of Management and Budget, they have to be disclosed to the Office of Management and Budget. So if the requesting agency is not disclosing it, then Office of Management and Budget's hear no evil, see no evil. And then just keep right on going. And all this has to do with the power. The government cannot punish you unless they earn the power. They got to earn it. They just don't get it. You got to do something, and they got to do something. And if they don't do what they're doing, or what they're supposed to do, then they can't punish you, and it doesn't matter what you do. And I just read to you page 78 where it says you do not have to supply that information. Now, the actual law says no person shall be penalized. No penalty shall apply, is what the law says. They don't want to tell you that. They want to tell you, you don't have to give us the information unless we got a valid OMB number. You go to the 91 form. Look at that on the 91 form, 1545-0074. Go 2 more pages over for the 92 form. Look at that again, 1545-0074. Wow, just every year you're just going to keep right on going. 93, 1545-0074. 94, 15, and all this will be at penaltyprotesters.org and com. You will be able to download each one of these documents that are taken off of IRS.gov website. Everything you see here, except for the things they didn't want you to see in the very back of this document that I have in your hands, came from IRS.gov. So you keep going all the way through, and you'll never find one 1040 form that ever changes from 1545-0074. Now, just on soundbite right now, taking a poll, if the law said that the OMB approval number can only be good for 1 or 3 years, just on the surface, if it had appeared for 15 years, wouldn't it look like there's something wrong with that number? Just a taste smell test? A little bit wrong with it? Well, there's a lot wrong with it. It's so wrong, in fact, you're getting ready to see how blatant they've just got in 2005. Keep on going through there all the way till you get to the green tab, and you're going to see that on 2004's 1040 form, it's 1545-0074. All the ones in between, and in fact, just so you know, from 1982's form, which was actually a 1981 form that didn't exist until after December 31st, 1981, because it would be a 1982 form. That's the first form. It had the same OMB number on it. It goes all the way back for 23 years, same number. Okay? Now, we've already gone through the instruction, the green tab. Just for a reminder, it does say you're not required to provide the information. And really, what it should say is, no person can be penalized for failure to supply the information if the information request form does not contain a valid or display a valid OMB control number. That's what it should say. That's a violation of the Paperwork Reduction Act. And guess where it's supposed to say it? On the form that's requesting the information, not on the instruction booklet. And that's why in 2005 they don't want to call it an instruction booklet. There became a big debate in the late 80s and early 90s about whether OMB had to have OMB approval on instructions. And the courts unanimously ruled that instructions were not subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act. But yet now you can see, without the instructions, they've got nothing. Now, when you get past the next tab that you want to go into, now for those of you looking on the website, the next thing you want to go to is tab onto the 1040A form for 2005. And if you'll notice, the 1040A form for 2005 has OMB number 1545-0074. And it looks like, oh my gosh, they're using that same number on every form. But that's not true up until 2005. And that truth is then told. If you look at the next form, the yellow tab, That's the 1040EZ form for 2005, 1545-0074. Now, you go to the red tab, the 1040ES form for 2006, 1545-0074 on the top right. And I try to give complete documents to the court other than the instruction booklet because it was voluminous and the only relevant page was page 78. And then notice that for foreign earned income, the purple tab, foreign earned income, a 2555 for those of you on the internet, has OMB number 1545-0074. Now, the problem, and I didn't attach these forms in this complaint because I didn't have to, but on the website, you can go and look at the 2004 1040A, and you'll find that that OMB number was 1545-0085, and it has been 0085 for 23 years backwards. And the 1040EZ form was 1545-0067, except for 2005. From 2004 to 1982, it was 0067. And the 1040ES form was 1545-0087 up until 2005. 2004, each of these forms had a different OMB number, but the same for 23 years. In 2005, they just decided to boycott all of it and put one number down on every form. Now, there's a reason why they did that. Because they're stuck. I call it checkmate. If you play chess, you'd understand. It'd almost be like playing against Tiger Woods and you'd never played golf before. I'm not saying that we can't lose, but if winning just means we have to finish the race ended a long time ago. So that means we won. It means it's over. All we had to do was figure it out. All we had to do is understand that the government is an example of us, and we tell them what we want done. We make them do what we want them to do. We are the writers of the law. We don't have to become a congressman who needs to raise $20 million and spend every waking moment trying to get reelected. We can do what we're doing here without having to do that. And we can do it by forcing them to come to our position. Now, I did not give you here all 15 years from 90 to 2004 of each of those numbers. I laid them in my complaint, which they are listed, so you can go look them up on the government website for yourself or at penaltyprotester.com and org. And it's just because I didn't need to. It wasn't necessary. My complaint here is derived from the fact that the IRS is not in compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act. They've never been in compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act. And they told 3 circuit courts of appeals in challenge that they don't have to comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act. Now, think about this just a moment. If you were a judge, and the IRS, represented by a lawyer, has put out to 300 million people an OMB number on a form, a private Paperwork Reduction Act disclosure statement that says you don't have to give us this information if we're not in compliance with the Act, and the lawyers for the IRS are telling the courts that they don't have to have a valid OMB number. When I saw that going on, and one of the greatest moves made was a motion for sanctions by the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service's lawyer, told the Third Circuit Court of Appeals that the petitioner in that case was so frivolous for demanding that the OMB number on the 1040 form must be a valid current OMB number, that he and his wife deserved to be sanctioned for making that claim on appeal to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And when I saw that, I spit out a motion for sanctions against the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue and a motion to strike the Commissioner's motion. And all I did was tell the 3 judges, look at the OMB number on the top of the 1040 form. When they put it on there, they subjected that form to whether it's valid or not. When they put Paperwork Reduction Act statement on there, they knew what they were doing. But the proof that caused the motion for sanctions against the commissioner, which they were ordered to respond by January 3rd, 2006, and to which they did not respond. The proof of that is the next document, which is the green tab in what you have here, and it would be called the 83 SFR 83 form for some years and 83I for the most current years on the website. This is a document that is required to be filed with the Office of Management and Budget to get approval for the O&B numbers so that the IRS can go out and ask people to give them information on the 1040 form by April 15th of the next year. This is the application for it. And there's a couple of things to pay particularly close attention to. If you look right above where the word received is, it says right there, requested expiration date. And there are two options. It says 3 years from approval date or other. And the IRS asked for this to be good, this 98 number, this number they're asking for in 1998, to be good till 9 of 2001. Why would a 1998 1040 form need to have a valid OMB number good till 2001? What a question. There's a real logical answer. Because they're not complying with the law. You at least have to conclude by this application that there is a requirement for an expiration date for an OMB number. Whether it's printed on the 1040 form or not is another issue. But whether OMB says there's an expiration, that has to be, it's mandatory. It's mandatory that that number no longer be good after a certain day. But they didn't want this number here good just till, this is for 1998's 1040 form, and they didn't want this number here good until April 16th, 1999. They wanted it good for 2 more years after that. Now, once you drop down to line 10, it says abstract. Now, this is a requirement. Remember, this form is not made by the IRS. This is a form the IRS has to answer questions on. There's a difference. And in order for them to have a right to penalize you, they got to get past this test. And they can't get past it. One of the reasons the Supreme Court said, and on the website it's Dole versus the Steelworkers, the Supreme Court said a very interesting point that is required in order for any agency to be allowed, authorized, to collect any information from any American citizen. And it's, again, Dole versus Steelworkers. On line 10 right there, it reads, these forms are used by individuals to report their income tax liability. And the next sentence, a very important one for a violation of the Paperwork Reduction Act under the Supreme Court's decision in Dole, reads, this data is used to verify that the items reported on the forms are correct. Actually, just to get this straight, there's 2 violations on this one. And I'm giving you all the violations that I know of, but there are plenty that we have barely discovered. And as long as we have one, no person can be penalized. As long as we have one violation, power to penalize is done. Okay? In Dole, and this is on page 31, I have a lot of cases on my computer here, and I get to do word searches. And technology has, you know, the government has Learjets and I have a RV. But we both have access to the same amount of word searches. Supreme Court, Dole versus Steelworkers, page 32. The Paperwork Reduction Act was enacted in response to one of the less auspicious aspects of the enormous growth of our federal bureaucracy. Got it? That's why it was passed. The very next paragraph reads, the Act prohibits any federal agency from adopting regulations which impose paperwork requirements on the public unless the information is not available to the agency from another source within the federal government. Now I want you to look at line 10 again, and I want you to see that second sentence right there, and it says the data is used to verify that the items reported on the forms are correct. Now tell me something. You file a tax return, information form, 1040 form, you give it to the government, and then they're going to look at it and make sure you told the truth. You with me so far? How are they going to tell whether you told the truth or not? Just tell me. Where are they going to get the other source of information to compare with what you told them? To verify that you told the truth? Where are they going to get it? Are they going to get it from another part of the IRS? They're going to get it from another part of the federal government? Well, if they're going to verify it, they're going to have to say what they're going to use to verify it with. And if they're going to say, well, they're going to use the information they already have to make sure you're telling the truth, then they just admitted to a violation of the Paperwork Reduction Act. Because again, the words are, Supreme Court 1990, the Act prohibits. Do you see that? The Act prohibits any federal agency. Do you all agree the IRS is a federal agency? I mean, some people have made issue with it. I don't. It's a federal agency. So can you understand that they have to say in this application that there is no other source for the information in order for them to get approval? Now you understand why they're arguing they don't have to comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act. Because that is tantamount, that is saying we can't. We can't comply. The IRS cannot do what Congress has enacted them to do. But you still got to do what you're supposed to do. Well, wait a minute. Well, what if what I'm supposed to do is hinged upon what you're supposed to do? Oh, well, I'll still do it if I want to. But you can't penalize me when I get around to it. Now, all of a sudden, see, they got a problem. And that's the kind of problem that takes a congressman and takes a judge away from their golf game and raising money to get reelected, and sits their butt down there in Washington, D.C. and tries to figure out a game plan of what they're going to do next. And you're all hearing it right here because it's getting ready to go nationwide. It's penalty protest. There's no prejudice in being a penalty protester. There's no prejudice in a jury. The government's not going to be able to say, well, because he didn't pay his penalty, you didn't get your Social Security check. No, I beg to differ. The reason why you didn't get your Social Security check is because Congress spent all the money. See, we got what we need to politically push them back. There's too much evidence. And we just need to get rid of the IRS. My passion is to just get rid of the IRS. I'm not trying to cause chaos. I don't want to cause chaos. I didn't ask them to come and steal $2,000 from me. I didn't ask. Matter of fact, you know why they came in my house? Because I started telling people to file tax returns. I did not want to tell them to file a tax return because you're going to be penalized if you don't. I wanted to tell them to file tax returns because if you don't, the government's going to stick these people all over you and make your life a living hell until you do. And most people don't know what that means. I was being honest. And anybody that's been through it knows I'm being honest. But I'm not going to, and this is why they came at me, because I wouldn't stand up there and say, you got to do it because the law says you have to do it. Well, guess what? I have found too many things in honesty to prove to you that the law doesn't require you to do certain things. Now listen, if they already have another source for that information, then they can zip that tax bill out just like that, lickety-split. And they do not need you to sign anything under the penalty of perjury to impose a tax on you for that. The Sullivan case, 1927, says that the government can compel you to sign your rights away under the Fifth Amendment because there's no pervasive criminal regulation going on with the use of the 1040 tax form. Well, we all know in 2005 that's not true. And, you know, it's been a long time. Think about it, 1927, 2005. We need to step out of keeping people in bondage. We need to decide to go ahead and be the free country that George Bush says we are. Of course, it's easy to say something and hard to back it up. But when somebody asks you why you're protesting the penalties, you can just say, because I believe what George Bush said is right and that we're all free. And we need to show the whole world that we can take care of ourselves, we can live right, we can make decisions, and we can live by the rule of law. We can. We all can do it. We don't have to violate a principle and be scared of what can happen. The principle here is, well, you filed before. Well, guess what? Do I have to file 3 1998 tax forms? Do you have to file 3? Because if you filed 1, isn't that game over? Isn't that deal out? And then you get back to, well, why are they asking for 3-year approval in a 1-year form? And don't you think they got the experience by now to know that they're only going to need approval for 1 year? I mean, they're putting the year on the form every year, aren't they? It seems to me it's simple to understand. So here I've given you an application that says they want a form number to be good till 2001. Now I just picked out one here for a reason. There's one of these forms for every year. But I showed you in 15 tax forms, 1040 tax forms, 1545-0074 is on every one of those. At every one of them. And the number that's on the 99 and the 2000 and 2001 form that this one here is dealing with, it's the same number on 2002. So now we know that expiration is meaningless. Means nothing to anybody, including the IRS. Now, in outlining violations, you can see why in 2005 they decided to put 1545-0074 on the 1040A, the 1040EZ, the 1040ES, the 2555. It doesn't matter if it's an IRS tax form, it's 1545-0074. But there's a problem with that. There's a big problem with that. And it comes from the law. I'm only telling you what I read in the law. I didn't write the law, just commanded to obey it. The Paperwork Reduction Act has a specific section which is called 44 U.S.C. 3507 sub H sub 3. And don't you think for one second that the 1040 form is not a form subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act, because Dole said all tax forms are included. That's the Supreme Court of the United States. And by the way, if you don't have to go by one Supreme Court case, then why do you have to go by the rest of them? And shouldn't it be that if you're going to use all these other judicial interpretations against somebody, that they should be able to have all of them come together in one basket? I'll go by all of them. And in chess, I think it's checkmate and your move. If you ever played chess before, where are you going to go from there? 3507H3 of Title 44 says that once a form, information request form, is approved and issued a valid current O&B number, no one is authorized to change one period, one dot, one T crossed on that form. No alteration, no moving it around a different way, no asking the questions in a reverse order, nothing. That form is approved with that number. And if anybody who's got that form, who's got that 3-year maximum approval, wants to make a change, they've got to resubmit request to change, called 83C form. And they got to tell them why they're making the change. Now all of a sudden, you see, we have a 23-year used O&B number on a form that can only be valid for 3 years, and then we have issues dealing with changes. Now, on the second page of the purple tab, and by the way, they use statistical information against me, And on the bottom of this green tab on number 17, it says statistical methods. It says, does this information collection employ statistical methods? And the answer is no. But yet the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue, through a rogue IRS agent, decided that they could do what this application said they couldn't do. It didn't exist. But it took Congress to write a law. We all knew they couldn't do it, but there was no law telling them they couldn't do it. Do you live in a country, a very important question, where all things not prohibited are allowed? Or do you live in a country where all things not allowed are prohibited? You have to answer that question. I live in the former. I live in a place where I have all the power except that which I don't have. No one else has all the power except that which they gave me. That doesn't exist in my world. It doesn't exist in a lot of people's lives. Now this second page, if you'll notice, it says here, if you are unable to certify, this is at the bottom right above the signature name in kind of a cursive writing, if you are unable to certify compliance with any of these provisions, identify the item below and explain the reasons in item 18 of the supporting statement. And you notice there's nothing written below it. This is on the green tab, which would be the Paperwork Reduction Act Submission 80, CFR 83 and 83I, depending on what year, and 83C form. Now, what they have said here on this certification, what they said that there was nothing that they had to admit to under penalty of perjury. At the top of that page, it says Certification of Paperwork Reduction Act Submissions. Somebody has to certify under penalty of perjury something, or there's no approval number for the 1040 form. So a person can be penalized. And it says, on behalf of this federal agency, is there any doubt at this point that the IRS is a federal agency under the Paperwork Reduction Act? When they use O&B numbers, they put Paperwork Reduction Act statements, and now they're certifying under the Paperwork Reduction Act. There is no question that they have to comply with the Act, but yet the lawyers for the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue have told 3 circuit courts of appeals that the 1040 form does not require a valid OMB number. You think they're going to win on that? I don't think so. No, I don't think so. It goes on. The text of 5 CFR 1329 and related provisions appear at the end of the instructions. The certification is to be made with reference to those regulatory provisions as set forth in the instructions. And it goes, the following is a summary of the topics regarding the proposed collection of information that the certification covers. This is what the certification has to cover. It is necessary for the performance of the agency's action, which means they have to have no other source for the information, which we already know in the application. They say that they do because they're going to say, they're going to look at what you say and compare it to what they already have. That's the only way they could verify it. It avoids unnecessary duplication. It reduces burden on small entities. It uses plain, coherent, and unambiguous terminology that is understandable to respondents. It's supposed to say on it, it's voluntary or mandatory. It's supposed to say on the form, if it's mandatory, citing the statutory authority that makes it mandatory. If you go back and look at every one of those 1040 forms, you will not see any statute ever mentioned. None whatsoever. Its implementation will be consistent and compatible with current reporting and record-keeping practices. It indicates the retention period of record-keeping requirements. Have you ever looked on the 1040 form to see that it talks about how long you need to keep your records on the 1040 form? They cannot possibly put everything on the 1040 form that the law requires them to put on it. They can't do it. Does that mean that we should say, okay, give them a pass? No. We can't give the IRS a pass. They're too big, they're too powerful, and they have too much control. They've got to be regulated, they've got to go by the written law, and they've got to go to jail if they violate it. Period. End of story. And my jail for the IRS, of course, is life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the IRS. That's not for IRS agents. It's for the IRS. IRS has got to go away. It's got to end. Okay? The messenger, the IRS agent is a messenger doing their job. Some of them take it a little personal. As you can see, someone tried to steal $2,000, or more than one tried to steal. And I'm sorry for them. Something happened in their life a long time ago that led them to that place. And maybe as a result of my case, they'll change. Who knows? Going on, it informs respondent of the information called for. Look on the 1040 form. the very first tab, and tell me if you see why the information is being collected on there. Did they ever tell you that on that blue, the red tab, the very first tab? Just look on that and see. Did it ever say anything in there about why they're getting this information? It never says it anywhere. The closest you could get to it, it says, for Disclosure, Privacy Act, and Paperwork Reduction Act, see page 78. Oh, I opened up a book. I had 78 pages in it, and I saw page 78, and it wasn't there. I mean, what does that mean? Use of information. They're going to use the information you give them on the tax form to verify it's true. That's a criminal regulated act by the IRS. Because you know what? If it's not true, that's a violation of 26 U.S.C. section 72061, false statement. It's a Class E felony, 3-year maximum prison time. All that they're doing with the 1040 form is verifying that you told them the truth. And that means, if you didn't tell them the truth, what? It's penalty of perjury. What's the penalty for perjury? What does everybody think the penalty of perjury is? The reason why the IRS has got to go is because it's a crime going in and it's a crime coming out. You're threatened with the crime to give the information, and you're threatened with the crime when you give them the information. That cannot stand anymore. We're not going to make it if we don't get rid of it. Don't let them penalize you anymore. Be a penalty protester. Burden estimate. Nature of response. Nature and extent of confidentiality. Need to display, this is the one that I brought you through all this because I wanted to be thorough, this last one. Need to display current valid OMB control number. For 23 years, it's 1545-0074 on the 1040 form. For 23 years, it's 1545-0085 on the 1040A. The 1040ES for 23 years, 1545-0087. The 1040EZ for 23 years, 1545-0675. The 2555, a completely different OMB number until 2005, January 1, 2 days before they're supposed to tell the Third Circuit Court of Appeals why they shouldn't be sanctioned for saying that they don't have to have a valid OMB number and that that's sanctionable. And they put on 1545-0074 on the 1040, the 1040A, the 1040EZ, the 1040ES, the 2555, and a bunch of other forms. They just looked at the Paperwork Reduction Act and said, well, you know what? We are so much in violation of this law that if we have to comply with it, we can't. It's done. We're not going to get any more penalties. Well, hallelujah. No more penalties. The wicked witch is dead. What are we going to do about it? There are plenty of things we can do. But so you don't think that when they tell the courts they don't have to have a valid number displayed, they have to certify it to the Office of Management and Budget. It has to be certified that they will display that number. And the law says,
did they ever tell the Third Circuit?
No. Heck no. Are you kidding? They can't answer the question. There's no way to answer the question. The answer to the question, the only one that can be given is they are not in compliance with the law. That is it. There's nothing else. Period. Nothing yet. Nothing yet. But as you well know, the state Supreme Court in Illinois, after, 9 years of me fighting over that, just unanimously told us we've been right all along. After 5 judges told us we were wrong, and all of a sudden, all the judges said we were right. Every one of them. And that's because, you know what? We were never wrong. We were never, ever wrong. And I'm not wrong here. Here's what the PRA says. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, no person shall be subject to any penalty for failing to maintain and provide information to any agency if 1. The information collection request involved was made after December 31st, 1981, and 2. Does not display a current control number assigned by the director, and 3. Or fails to state that such request is not subject to this chapter. Now, that statute right there says that if the IRS doesn't believe that their 1040 request for information form is subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act, they're supposed to write that on the 1040 form and give it to you that way. But instead they got OMB 1545-074. Disclosure Statement, Paperwork Reduction Act, see page 78. Application to the Office of Management and Budget says we're going to verify the information we get. And then when they get in the court, oh, we don't have to do that. Well, all of a sudden, now, we've zoomed in on something that the judges are going to have to accept. And they're not going to want to look like the ones that are acting vigilante to say the IRS does not have to comply with the law. A lot of times, I found in a lot of my research and my mission that it was the thoroughness that was lacking from the individual side, and the government had 1,000 lawyers working on it. And now, over a period of time, the 1,000 lawyers isn't good enough anymore. Because no matter how many lawyers you've got, you're not going to be able to write a document that says the 1040 form doesn't have to have a valid OMB number on it. Okay? You can't do it because your witness to it is the one who applied for the OMB number. The commissioner who puts in his instructions, he's in compliance with it. So they have their own problem. They are they're trying to go against what they've done. You have to do nothing. And that's what anytime you start talking to federal judges at any level, you have to talk to them in their language, and they have a whole different language, whole different. I have been blessed through the Holy Spirit to learn how, by reading what they've written over the years, I understand how to write and talk to them. Doesn't mean they like what I'm saying, but they know what I've said. And now the question is, what are they going to do about it? Now, on the very next page, after that paid certification page, this is, God blessed me in 1995 with discovering that there's no clear answer to a question posed to the government. What law requires me to do this or that? And in 1997, I started sitting in criminal cases, watching criminal cases go through. And I started watching jury instructions on this person being charged with willful failure to file a 1040 form or a state tax form. And the jury instruction would say, a person is required to file a tax return according to the law if their gross income equals or exceeds for the calendar year, whatever at issue, and then they put a number in there. And I noticed that in every one of those pattern instructions, there was a blank line to be filled in by somebody. And I started wondering, why is that a blank line if it's the law? Is a blank line, does the law actually have a blank line in it? I mean, can you imagine? You are not allowed to blank as long as you blank the blank the blank. And then an agent can just walk up and go, well, I filled the blank in. Here you walk through the street. I blanked in. See, that's not going to work on the rule of law. And so I figured out that there became a huge debate in criminal cases over that blank line. And I've heard federal judges tell government lawyers, the revolution is going to begin in the morning if you don't have that number to me and where you got it from. As recent as in August of last year, the U.S. Attorney, IRS, CID, in a criminal case in Phoenix, Arizona, told a federal judge they have no clue where the exempt amount comes from. The expert for the IRS on the witness stand told the jury that the exempt amount came from Section 1 of the Internal Revenue Code. Anybody who's ever seen Section 1 knows there's nothing about exempt amount in Section 1. And they would all know that the exempt amount is supposed to be in 151D of the Internal Revenue Code. But there's a problem with 151D. If what Congress did, and it's really the lawyers that did this, they wrote the tax law in such a way that they didn't have to visit it every year. They wanted you to be burdened every year, but they didn't want to rewrite it every year. And so they wrote basically a blank line in the law and allowed the IRS the power to fill it in. Well, even if you agreed that the IRS has the power to fill it in, the disagreement is what to put in the line. And if the IRS has the power to fill that in, and they are a federal agency, then that would mean that it takes agency action to complete the law. And if agency action is required to complete the law, then the Paperwork Reduction Act applies to their request for information. So, for instance, in order for them to get approval for the 1040 form for 1990 that you have in your sheet there, if you look on the second page of it, you're going to see on the second page of the 1040 form for 1990 a standard exempt amount. And if you go every year in that stack, it would be the purple tab, and just every other page from 1990 forward, you're going to see a number in there. Line 36 on the 1990 form says $2,050. 1991, you're going to see a different number. On 1991's form, $2,150. This number changes every year on the form, but it never changed in 151D. It never changed in the Internal Revenue Code. It never changed by law written by Congress. This proves somebody is writing something that the legislature has never seen. Again, a reason why Office of Management and Budget has to approve the request. And remember, even if they got a 3-year approval number on the 1040 form, if they're going to change the second and third year, the exempt amount, they've got to, under 3507H3, they've got to submit a new application and tell them why they've changed that number, how they arrived at it to get approval for it. Now, it may be something insignificant to you as far as $100 here and $50 there, but that's not the issue. The issue is, can you be penalized? Because at the heart of what is holding on the IRS to America and thus causing, in my opinion, America to try to take its ideology to the rest of the world is because of the IRS. And we have to stop it. We can do better than the IRS. And even if you kept them under the idea under a different name, you still have to write the law to where everybody who it applies to can at least read it and understand it. Remember the theory, ignorance of the law is no excuse? What if the law doesn't exist? Is that an excuse? Is it a good enough excuse not to be penalized? Which is the key. Penalty protest, okay? So as you go through each one of those, you're going to see that I'm telling you exactly the truth. On the website, you just click on 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, and just keep right on going, and you're going to see that exempt amount change every year. Now, this very document that we're on right now, at the very back of your submission, which is the Paperwork Reduction Act submission, you're going to go in there to the third page, and at the top of it, it says Department of Treasury on it. And this is an attachment to the request to get approval for the number for the 1998 form. And you'll notice it says 1545-0074. And you notice it says IRS Form 1040 and Schedules A, B, C. It doesn't say 1040A. It doesn't say 1040EZ. It doesn't say 1040ES. It doesn't say 2555 attached to your 1040 or 1040A. It just has one form and the schedules that go with that one form. But yet they want you to think now that that form number is approved for all forms. Okay? If it didn't go from bad to worse, just stick with me a second. You'll see it. Now, again, the description on this page here says these forms are used by individuals to report their income tax liability. The data is used to verify that the items reported on the forms are correct. Just so you don't think I misread that because that word received stamped over it, now you can see what they've said. The next document in this series says, and this is on the application for 1998 on the SF-83, supporting statement on Form 1040. Okay? And it goes through and it tells you circumstances necessitating collection of information. Is there any doubt in your mind right now whether or not the IRS believes that they have to have OMB approval to collect this information? This is attached to their application. All right? And they're calling it a collection of information. An information request form, collection of information. Is there any difference? And then they go, IRC section 6011 and 6012 of the Internal Revenue Code require individuals to prepare and file income tax returns annually. Require. But what it doesn't say here is, as long as we've complied with the Paperwork Reduction Act. If not, if we haven't complied with the Paperwork Reduction Act, see page 78 of the instruction booklet that says no one has to do that. How do you remedy that paragraph right there with page 78 of the instruction booklet that says you don't have to give them the information if they don't display a valid O&B number? But right here, they're trying to get approval for a valid O&B number. And I use the word valid because that's the word that they have to have. It has to be a valid number, not just a number that they decide to use. I'll give you an example in my investigation of a year that there was no application. In 1995, the government shut down during the Christmas breaks. Remember Monica Lewinsky? There was no approval of Office of Management and Budget, or no one sought to have approval of any request for information form for 1995. Anybody who was ever charged with a crime for 1995, anybody who ever was found guilty of a crime in 1995 was completely not guilty, and the government had a duty to tell the American people in 1996 that they did not have to submit the information to the IRS because the IRS had not complied with the Paperwork Reduction Act. Now, there are several non-compliances. This one in particular for 95, a blatant violation, was that they didn't even try. They just carried over the number, made changes to the 1040 form, and didn't even have anybody look at it. Now, the reason why I bring this to your attention for 1995 is because as we're going to go through this page, we're going to flip over to the next page, and you can see each of the schedules that they talk about. This is supporting statement again for the SE, and you keep going. Justification of sensitive questions. And this next page is very important. The last two pages here to this document are very important. Section 6012 of the Internal Revenue Code provides a person is required to make, never says file, make an individual income tax return if their gross income equals or exceeds the exempt amount. It would be the same as every person who exceeds the speed limit of 75 miles an hour on Highway 51 is worthy of a ticket. They just left the 75 off. They just call it speed limit, exempt amount. But then they have this provision in 6012D4 that says the term exempt amount is given the same meaning as given at 151D. All right? Now, if you ever get to go to 151D, and you can look on at penaltyprotester.org and comment, you can see right there that there is no list at 151D. Here's the exempt amounts for the next 15 years. It's not there. Somebody has to write it. Now, this first page that we're on, is a supporting statement for 1040, and it says Schedule J, top left corner, just so you're on the same page with me. We're going to go to paragraph 12 right there, and this is on the Paperwork Reduction Act for 1998, for those of you watching. There's a list of CFR sections, and it says, we are asking for continued approval of these regulations that are associated with Form 1040. Now you notice they've got 1.151-1. Now section 6012 does not say see regulation 1.151-1. It says see section 151D. It says see the law Congress wrote. We all know that Congress didn't write this. But when you go to 1.151-1, what you're going to find is that they're asking here in this question, we're asking for continued approval of these regulations. This is not telling them where they got the exempt amount for 151D. This is asking to continue the approval of regulations under 0074. The very next page answers this question for you. It shows without any doubt. I'm sorry, the third page. This is the one that has to do with the law. And it says, starts out supporting statement for 1040 form, and it starts at 1.6011-1, and then it drops down in the middle. It says, the following are citations to 26 United States Code. Are y'all with me right there? That would be about halfway through the Paperwork Reduction Act. It looks like this. If you want to see what it looks like, this is what it looks like. So it'd be like the third page of code sections if you're at that point. Okay? And in the middle it says the following are citations to 26 United States Code. Now, in order for the IRS to be drawing the OMB office attention to their change of the exempt amount at 151D, they have to list it under the following statutes, the following citations of 26 U.S.C. Now, I want you to notice that they just skip right over 151D because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It did in 1 year. And the importance of this is that you have a right to elect people to run your government, that they would then vote and write on laws that would come in play, become law at the time they're in office. And you have a right to elect them. Right now, in the current present Internal Revenue Code, you cannot elect anybody to vote on the exempt amount. They'll never even hear it. They'll never address it. They'll be off raising money because the IRS is writing it. Now, I would agree, in some instances, the IRS may be able to do that. But if they're going to do it, they've got to comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act. That's all I'm talking about. And if they're not going to comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act, if the statement is they cannot comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act, then that game is over. And it's time to bring in whatever else God wants us to do that we're holding back because everybody's addicted to this very bad nightmare. Okay? It's a plague on the American people. It's a lot longer than any plague probably that we know of. It's just you have to recognize it as a plague. It's a bondage. And you can't... It's almost like the Santa Claus conspiracy. And everybody played a part in it. Everybody played a role in it. But nobody got an email from somebody that said, hey, make sure you tell your kids Santa Claus exists. And in fact, most everybody participated in the big hoax. And that's how bad the IRS is. Except it's 36%, 35%, 34%. It's penalties and interest way over 100%. You mess up on what you got your kids for Christmas, you know, it's not going to cost you the rest, everything you worked hard for in 1 year. Right now, our system is such in this place that everybody is maxed out in debt, barred to the hilt, and if they do one question, the government has so much power that they can put such a burden financially on them that they'll either squelch under the pressure or lose everything they have. We can't do it. We can't do it. I'm not going to do it. I believe that I would have to answer to God if I did it. Because I know. And because you all here tonight, and because you are watching this on the internet, you all will know as well. If they thought that they wanted OMB to look at their number for the exempt amount under 151D, they got to tell them, here's the number we changed from the form last year, and here's why we did it, and here's how we figured it out. We need you to approve this number. But since they don't draw attention to it, OMB doesn't look at it, and therefore it's not a valid OMB approval number. In many ways, it's not valid. In many ways, I clearly established for you that it's not current. I've also established for you in these documents that they know they have to comply with it. Now, I am not telling anybody not to file a 1040 form. I said it at the beginning, and I'm saying it now. What I'm taking out is the penalty. Okay? I'm a penalty protester, and I'm proud of it. And I will be a penalty protester for the rest of my life. We have to have taxes. But before we have taxes, we have to have a government that can impose those taxes. And before we have a government, we have to have laws, even to the point of bringing that government into existence. Every 4 years, we change a part of our government. Every 2 years, we change a part of our government. And every 6 years, we change a part of our government. There's one part of our government that only changes by death of the occupant. That's the only thing holding it together right now, is that office, which is the judicial branch of government. If you look on the next page, it says reason for changes in burden, major changes to Form 1040. If you don't think I'm telling you and what I believe to be accurate and correct, and you want to check it out for yourself, because I'm one of those guys that says trust, but only if you can verify. Don't trust until after the verification. They're getting in here and explaining to OMB why they changed the structure of a sentence on the 1040 form. We added line 44. We added line 24. To make room for this line, we removed the extra blank line on 21. Again, we're talking about blank lines are so important. But the one thing that they're overlooking on purpose, because Congress didn't write it, and that's the exempt amount. And here's the threat. If Congress has to vote every year on the exempt amount, then that puts that exempt amount in the hands of the people that have been elected to run our government. They can run on the stance that I will vote for a $100,000 exempt amount this year. I'll vote for $200,000. I'll vote to eviscerate the exempt amount and just wipe it all out together. It's a big battle, and everybody knows the only winners would be the American people. But by being deprived of that right, that suffrage right issue, the right to have people represent you before the laws are written, the government has made a tactical exchange which is very clear. If there is something that the executive branch government is asking of you, and the IRS is in the executive branch government, and that is not supported by the law, you are not required to provide the information to that executive branch of government. Okay? And that's just as clear as it can get. They know, those people in Washington who decided on January 1, 2005 to put the same OMB number on all the forms, knew that they were already in major violation of the Paperwork Reduction Act. And their attitude was, I actually thought they changed the number on the 1040 form. They spited me just to say that they had just one-upped me a little bit. They decided to get rid of all the other numbers and keep that one number. How are they ever going to explain that OMB approved a number for one form and it's now on 10 forms? And this just draws attention to the same point that I tried to make earlier with the exhibits attached that say to you, doesn't it just look a little bit suspicious when they're asking for at maximum 3-year approval for an expiration of a number and it appears on 23 forms in a row? Isn't that just a little, I better go look closer? Just a little bit? Well, see, I suggest that it is. I suggest it's a prima facie case that causes you to go in. It looks like on the surface there's something wrong, so we'll go look a little deeper and see if it really is. And then, of course, as I've taken you here tonight, I've taken you a little deeper. I showed you what I learned. Now, there's a couple things left here to go through on this part of it. And then we're going to take about a 10-minute break so that the brain can rest. This last document, which is the blue tab, this is the document that did not get filed, or one like it, the one we just went through in 1995. This is the newest version of the form, and if you look at the bottom left corner of the form, it's OMB 83I. Instead of SFR 83, it's 83I. The amendment form is still 83C, but this is the new form. And I have obtained many documents from the Office of Management and Budget I have a lady who has sent me, and even faxes at will, documents to me. And there is none of this that she's authorized to give me for 2005. Now, the reason why she can't give it to me is because of what it's going to say on the abstract, on the expiration date, on the reason for the information. Is it voluntary or mandatory? Because everybody in Washington now knows that they're not in compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act. Everybody knows because they're all having to defend it in cases across the country. And it's one thing for you to stand there as a federal agent, a lawyer for the IRS, the Department of Justice, and say that you can move on these penalties, that you can enforce the penalties. But once you are aware they're not in compliance with the Paperwork Reduction Act, and you take a step towards those penalties, you just violated the person's rights. Because it clearly says no penalty shall apply. It clearly says you don't have to give the information. These things are clearly written in the law. What excuse would anybody have to say, even in light of knowing that, they still came at you for whatever it is that they wanted? And that's because the law says what the law says. If you understand what's being said here, then you understand that before a person can be penalized, the IRS has to certify that they are in compliance with the federal law governing that certification. And the IRS has time and time again certified that they can't do it. And America has time and time again turned a blind eye to it. Now, I'm not going to turn a blind eye to that. And I suggest, after you have this 10-minute break, that we'll come back and we'll discuss what's going on now and the current status of it, so you can see what's getting ready to happen. Okay?
Just leave it on.
Okay.